Therapy session mixtape. Another ATN Genius Boy collaboration. Let's go. We're dealing with hidden assassin, silent killers. Hidden assassin, silent killers. With hidden assassin, silent killers. Government sponsored, corporate funded drug dealers. With hidden assassin, silent killers. Hidden assassin, silent killers. With hidden assassin, silent killers. Government sponsored, corporate funded drug dealers. Wake up. Y'all better unplug from that matrix, man. See the world for what it really is. You know what I'm saying? Genius Boy B. Israel, stand up. Nazarene. Praise y'all for life. Praise y'all for life.
The conventional therapies for medulloblastoma is one of the true success stories of pediatric oncology in that it allows a curative potential in over 75% of patients that
May I interrupt you just real briefly? Because I saw some of the children that were cured by this treatment. I saw them. They were mentally retarded. They couldn't talk. They couldn't speak. The cancer supposedly was cured, but the child was a vegetable. Now, I'm not sure that that's what those parents envisioned when they went through the conventional treatment.
This is Thomas using alternative therapy, and this is Lynn, conventional therapy, 2 months worth. Which would you choose? Who decides?
When Donna and I made the decision that there was going to be no radiation or chemo used on Thomas, the doctor decided to start hounding us. As a result, he told our attorney that because we had chosen not to speak to him directly and not to go with conventional therapy, that it left him no choice but to file charges against us with Child Protective Services for medical neglect, child abuse, and child neglect, which he did. Is the consent form to do radiation that we did at the University Medical Center. And when we initially did it, the doctor filled everything out, and then he went on to explain that possible side effects would be hair loss, skin redness, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and loose BMs. And that's where he stopped. He said, go ahead and sign it. And I thought, well, gosh, if that's all we're dealing with, maybe it's not as bad as I thought. So I had signed it, and he left the room. About 10 minutes later, he came back and said, oh, by the way, Dad, I forgot. And he took it out of my hand and put it with the others and put the carbons back. He says, he'll also have fluid in the middle ear, hearing loss, hypothyroidism, spinal growth deficit, possible loss of IQ, memory loss, secondary tumors, hypopituitarism, low-level hormones, and radiation necrosis, which is where the brain turns hard. And that's when I knew we were in trouble.
If your child was dying of cancer, wouldn't you want the best treatment available?
I want to know why my husband was put through 6 cycles of chemotherapy, and we were told up front it probably would have no effect.
The biggest cover-up in the cancer industry is that the industry is based on wealth, not health.
In this matter of life and death, some say the federal government is making matters worse, much worse.
And here you are pleading for the life of a person, and they're talking about the integrity of their bureaucratic process.
The couple's battle for alternative treatment is at the center of a national debate over medical freedom of choice.
Doctor, can we talk about cancer a little bit? Various types out there. What are some of the things that you've seen in terms of your patients, and what some of the things that you've been able to do?
A better thing to talk about in relationship to, well, I will talk about that, right? A better thing to talk about, however, is the relationship between profits and cancer in the United States. There was a study that was published, I believe it was in 1994. It was a 12-year program, 12-year study. They looked at adults who had developed cancer as an adult, not childhood cancer, but adult cancer, right? And this is the main types of cancer that we get here in the United States. They did a meta-analysis of these people all around the world who developed cancer as adults for 12 years and were treated with chemo. And they looked at the results. And they published the results in the Journal of Clinical Oncology. And the results? 97% of the time, chemotherapy does not work. 97% of the time it doesn't work. So why is it still used? It's one reason and one reason only: money. If you go to a medical doctor, an MD, with a sinus infection, and that doctor prescribes an antibiotic, he gets no financial kickback. Now, if he prescribes 5,000, of that antibiotic in 1 month, the drug company that makes it might send him to Cancun for a conference, right? Mm-hmm. But he gets no direct remuneration. It's not with chemotherapeutic drugs. It's different. Chemotherapeutic drugs are the only classification of drugs that the prescribing doctor gets a direct cut of. So if your doctor prescribes chemotherapy for you, here's how it goes, more or less. The doctor buys it from the pharmaceutical company for $5,000, sells it to the patient for $12,000, insurance pays $9,000, and the doctor pockets the $4,000 difference. And there ought to be a law. The only reason chemotherapy is used is because doctors make money from it. Period. It doesn't work 97% of the time. If Ford Motor Company made an automobile that exploded 97% of the time, would they still be in business? No. This is the tip of the iceberg of the control that the pharmaceutical industry has on us.
Aspartame is a common artificial sweetener found in over 6,000 products worldwide, especially in diet soda products. It is the most consumed artificial sweetener in the United States. With the power of slick marketing, the public has been led to believe that aspartame is safer and healthier than regular sugar. But nothing could be further from the truth. Aspartame accounts for 75% of adverse reactions to food additives reported to the FDA. The most common reaction is a headache or migraine, but many reactions are very serious, including seizures and death. Aspartame has also been linked to depression and increased weight, yet these products continue to be marketed as healthy options that support calorie restriction. Aspartame is composed of 40% aspartic acid, 50% phenylalanine, and 10% methanol or wood alcohol. The amino acids aspartic acid and phenylalanine benefits your body's function, but you ingest these amino acids excessively in aspartame. Aspartame is an excitotoxin that excites or stimulates your brain cells to death. On the other hand, too much phenylalanine can change your brain's physiology and deplete you of serotonin, a neurotransmitter that helps regulate mood. Naturally occurring methanol found in certain fruits and vegetables is firmly bonded to pectin, which allows the methanol to be safely passed through your digestive tract. The phenylalanine methyl bond, called a methyl ester, is very weak and allows the methyl group on the phenylalanine to easily break off and form methanol. Methanol from aspartame is extremely dangerous to humans. It is carried to susceptible tissues in your body where alcohol dehydrogenase, ADH, converts it to formaldehyde, the fluid used for embalming. Your body lacks key enzymes that eliminate formaldehyde that accumulate in your cells and wreak havoc on sensitive proteins and DNA. It is linked to breast and prostate cancer, as well as oxidative damage in your brain. Animals have a protective mechanism that allows methanol to be broken down into harmless formic acid, but there's a major biochemical problem with methanol in humans because of the difference in how it's metabolized compared to all other animals. This is why toxicology testing on animals is a flawed model. It doesn't fully apply to humans. But why is aspartame still on the market? Aspartame was discovered by accident in 1965 when James Schlatter, a chemist of G.D. Searle Company, was testing an anti-ulcer drug. G.D. Searle fervently pushed for the approval of aspartame on the market, to no avail. Scientific evidence, including the Bressler report created in 1977, linked aspartame to a number of side effects, including a huge risk of brain tumors. It also revealed fraud and manipulation of data done on aspartame studies. One day after the inauguration of Ronald Reagan in 1981, Searle reapplied to the FDA for approval to use aspartame as a food sweetener. Its CEO, Donald Rumsfeld, had Dr. Arthur Hull Hayes Jr. appointed as the new FDA commissioner. Hayes appointed a 5-person scientific commission to review the current decision on aspartame. When it became clear that the panel would uphold the ban, Hayes installed a 6th member who voted in favor of aspartame. He broke the tie in aspartame's favor, which led to the inevitable approval of the sweetener in 1983. In 1985, Monsanto purchased G.D. Searle and made Searle Pharmaceuticals and the NutraSweet company separate subsidiaries. Today, there are over 900 published studies revealing the detrimental effects of aspartame. Migraines are the most reported aspartame reaction. Chronic exposure to this sweetener can bring about or worsen serious conditions such as asthma, lymphomas and leukemia, brain tumors and brain cancer, irritable bowel syndrome, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and epilepsy. Aspartame's connection to cancer cannot be ignored. Excitotoxins like aspartame have been found to dramatically promote cancer growth. A researcher found that when cancer cells were exposed to aspartame, they became more mobile, and their metastasis or spread became more enhanced. The longest ever human aspartame study, spanning 22 years and conducted by the Brigham and Women's Hospital from Harvard University, found a clear association between aspartame consumption and increased risk of blood cancers. The Harvard study found that men who consumed more than 1 diet soda per day had a heightened risk of developing multiple myeloma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Leukemia was associated with diet soda intake in both sexes. This study strongly confirms the dangers of aspartame for humans, as it is the first large-scale and long-term observational human study ever conducted on this sweetener. But after yielding to severe pressure from the industry, the researchers downplayed their findings, minimizing the impact of the study. Despite these red flags, food manufacturers still continue to use aspartame for their products. In fact, the International Dairy Foods Association and the National Milk Producers Federation have petitioned the FDA to amend the standard of identity for milk to allow aspartame to be added to it without being listed on the label. Contrary to promises of diet soda and diet products containing it, aspartame can make you gain weight by stimulating your appetite, increasing your cravings for carbohydrates, and promoting fat storage. Aspartame toxicity is not well known by doctors, despite its frequency. Most of its symptoms mimic other health conditions, so if you're having a reaction to sweeteners, you may be unaware of it or are blaming it on another cause. To see if you're suffering from aspartame toxicity, eliminate all artificially sweetened products from your diet for 2 weeks. Reintroduce them to your diet one by one for about 3 servings per day. Compare how you feel with when you weren't taking any sweeteners. If you notice no changes, your body is able to tolerate it acutely without any immediate response. If you notice that you are experiencing side effects, you should immediately report it to the FDA by going to the FDA Consumer Complaint Coordinator website and calling the phone number for your state. Stick to natural sweeteners such as stevia, lohan, and dextrose. Take note that even these should be consumed in moderation. If you are struggling with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, insulin sensitivity issues, or are overweight, it is recommended to avoid all types of sweeteners, both artificial and natural. For more information, visit Mercola.com.
Here is an extract from the interview. Fitzgerald, there are 2 big, and by big I mean monumental, problems with the argument and the perspective taken by federal regulatory agencies and by the manufacturers of foods and medicines. The argument is that trace levels of these chemicals do no harm to human health. What that argument ignores is the cumulative effect of hundreds, if not thousands, of these chemicals entering and then mixing within the human body. This is known as the body burden. We each carry a body burden of these synthetic chemicals. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, starting in 1999, began testing the blood of thousands of Americans to determine what synthetic chemicals are being carried in their blood, their body fat and their body organs. The results of these tests, more than 10,000 people have been tested so far, is that every single person tested was found to carry hundreds of these synthetic chemicals. The problem here is that our bodies do not recognize these synthetic chemicals, most of which have been invented, patented and produced since World War II. Our livers, which are the main detoxifying organs of our bodies, do not recognize these synthetic chemicals, and as a result, do not metabolize them. Instead, the chemicals are either pushed off into the far reaches of the liver, to be stored, or sent into body fat and body organs to be stored. As these toxins accumulate, they begin to interact with each other. This is where the problem, that regulatory agencies and manufacturers want to overlook, becomes a health disaster for us.
Nothing we've done in a century has substantially reduced the death rate of various cancers relative to the population density. We are a total failure.
Standard of care simply means we've used this for decades unopposed, and no one's opposed us because we've imprisoned them. And anyone that dares speak against us, we throw in jail.
And they will also threaten to take all your children away and then bargain with you and say, okay, we will give you back these other children if you just let us have this one and treat them. And what are you supposed to do as a parent?
We've had, since 1971, a very long period of time to see that the current methods of doing things are not working. Chemotherapy has long ago reached its limits. Surgery and radiation, although they become technically more refined, they only really work when you can get the tumor early and remove it, but the ancient Egyptians knew that.
Conventional medicine doesn't know how to treat cancer. They treat cancer at the symptoms of it. They don't treat the underlying condition of it. Doctors will look at the lump or the bump, and they say, there is the cancer. That's defined as the cancer. And so then they will treat the lump or the bump. They will do whatever they can to get it to go away. They will burn it away, they will cut it out, or they'll try to poison it. And if they can succeed in getting rid of that lump or bump, then they say, aha, we got rid of the cancer. With a person on chemotherapy, the idea is, well, we're going to kill the cancer cells just before we kill the patient. And if we can draw that fine line, then we're successful. So in my view, this is primitive medicine. I think someday people will look back at this period of history and they'll laugh at it, just the way we look back at the way they used to bleed patients.
When I was a drug chemist, one of my first jobs was to design a tamoxifen derivative. Anytime you have to design a derivative of an existing drug, that means there's something wrong with the drug. And what we found in the lab was that tamoxifen was actually causing cancer. The chemists that I was working with, my superiors, etc., just said, you know, it's $1 billion industry and tamoxifen's not coming off the market. And if we can design a safer derivative, great. But if we can't, tamoxifen's going to remain on the market.
Multiple studies in the 1990s show that while tamoxifen reduces the incidence of breast cancer, it more than doubles the occurrence of uterine cancer.
You have doctors spending 3 years learning how to do chemotherapy and radiation. You have specialist radio-oncology. You have cancer surgeons. You have cancer oncology. So you have this entire industry built on the paradigm of purging the body. Even though we find that that doesn't work, that industry is not going to just pack up and go away.
Chemotherapy and radiation therapy are nonspecific. They kill anything in its way. The reason why people lose their hair, the reason why people get nauseated and vomit is because chemotherapy kills any actively dividing cell, so irrespective of normal or not.
And if you think of it, it's like going in and doing an air raid, dropping bombs on a village to get rid of a pocket of rebels that are housed in a small area.
The chemotherapies that it says right on there from the manufacturer has not been proven safe or effective for pediatric application. So my question is, if the guys that make it say, gosh, we don't know if it works,
and we don't know if it's safe, but we'll put you in prison if you don't do it. What's that all about? It's insane.
You're the American Cancer Society. Don't you want cancer to be prevented in America? Instead, they end up on the side of the government, arguing that the information should be censored, suppressed, never allowed to reach the American consumer. Well, that speaks volumes, I think. And then you have to ask yourself, who does the American Cancer Society represent? Well, the answer with all nonprofit organizations is defined by where their financial support comes from.
The American Cancer Society is one of the world's wealthiest nonprofit organizations. It has assets including land, cars, and cash totaling more than $2 billion. In order to finance this operation, the ACS has established a long history of partnerships with deep-pocketed corporations.
And what is the upshot of that? The upshot of that is it costs on average about $1.6 billion for a single drug to be approved in the United States. That game can only be played by the largest monopolies on earth. So if you invent a drug, you discover an agent that has therapeutic utility, and you're in the scientific community out there, you can largely kiss that drug goodbye.
We have an extraordinary story for you of a cancer doctor whose patients say he's performing miracles, but the government wants to close him down.
Throughout the century, promising cures and therapies are met harshly by the AMA, the FDA, and the ACS. Scientists, including the likes of Nobel laureates Linus Pauling and Otto Warburg, are considered traitorous and their work labeled as quackery.
Canadian research team has come up with DCA. They believe it's a cheap and simple drug that kills almost all cancers. You heard that right. The real story is you can't have it. Not because it's unsafe, but because your blood's going to shoot out of your eyes because it doesn't make any money.
And in the U.S., the FDA has shut down all sites selling the drug.
How do you take something that costs pennies a day and fit it into a system that at the end of the process is supposed to generate a drug that's going to make $2 or $4 billion a year for you? Can't be done.
In November 2001, 2 years after his diagnosis, the Navarros are told Thomas only has a few days left to live.
So then we had to make the decision to let him go. And it was very difficult. But he fought so hard. And so did we. And
his death certificate reads, respiratory arrest due to chronic toxicity of chemotherapy. That says it all.
yeah.
It says it all.